Hi there, and welcome to the Comics and More podcast. I'm Dave Ferraro from Comics and More.
And I'm Patrick Markfort from Articulate Nerd. This week we are going to be taking a look at a couple of books put out by the small press publisher Sparkplug. They are a very small publisher who do probably, what people would consider to be art comics. So we wanted to take an episode and examine one of those publishers. So we picked a couple of their books. I don't really know if they're necessarily a representative sampling of the kinds of stuff that Sparkplug did. They're both sort of horror-themed books. So we're going to be looking at a recent release, The Heavy Hand by Chris Silla. I think that came out in late 2010. And we're also going to be looking at the anthology of Victorian horror stories, Orchid. That came out in the early 2000s and was one of Sparkplug's earliest releases. So let's jump right into it with our review of Chris Silla's The Heavy Hand. And I hope I'm pronouncing the cartoonist's name correctly. I'm not sure on that. This is that book, so pretty great. Kind of psychedelic looking cover there. Mm-hmm. The Heavy Hand is a very interesting book, and it's something of a challenge to describe what this book is about, but I'm going to attempt it. On its most basic level, I suppose The Heavy Hand is about a very unreliable narrator is our main character. And he is a young man who is essentially abandoning his girlfriend or friends and traveling cross country, or I don't know if it's cross country, but
it wasn't made very
clear. He's going to track down this scientist who is working on some sort of experiments in this underground cave. And this young man is going to go and hopefully work with this scientist. And we later find out that the scientist who he's going to work for is not really that aware of that. So the narrator, as the story goes along, we find is a little bit, he has some issues, especially as far as telling the truth goes, which makes an elliptical narrative even more difficult to hang on to. So a young man goes to work with this scientist doing strange experiments in an underground cave. There is a rival group of scientists as well that the scientist that had been working with, and now he's kind of ostracized from them. The young man encounters those scientists first. So that is kind of the base plot that kind of provides the underpinning for The Heavy Hand. And the experiments that these scientists are doing, ostensibly they are studying these eggs that they've found in these underground caverns. Eggs that appear to have dead reptiles in them, and don't, appear to be hatching, or they don't know what these eggs are, where they came from. And their efforts, though, are hampered by these strange gelatinous creatures with a single eyeball who attack the scientists at various points throughout the narrative. So as bizarre as all of that sounds, that is kind of the normal narrative level that this book exists on. Because as it goes along, especially as it spirals towards its conclusion, the narrative becomes really unhinged from reality. And it sort of is kind of a David Lynchian kind of, thing where you're not quite sure what's happening or how one thing connects to another. It has kind of an elliptical, kind of dreamlike structure. There's a cult involved that call themselves the Heavy Hand, who wear masks over their heads that look similar to the eyeball creatures, and it never really connects or adds up to a really tight, coherent structure. And I don't mean that as a detriment. I mean, it's obviously by design that it's a little unclear how all of these elements connect to other elements. But it's more about atmosphere and mood. And again, this is a horror piece, but there's a lot of humor in it too. It's quite funny, at times. There's also a masked character who looks kind of like a superhero almost type character, or he's got like a suit and like a domino mask, who he shows up at various points throughout the narrative. We're not really sure what his connection to anything is, so it's very bizarre, but it's a comic that I really enjoyed, very much so. I really liked The Heavy Hand. I thought it was incredibly well done. I've not read too much from this cartoonist before. I guess he's been in some Kramer's Ergot, but this is the first work by him that I've really noticed. I think this is his first kind of graphic novel collected work, and I gotta say, I mean, I'm having trouble, describing the plot of it, but it's not really about plot. It's more about these scenes. It's kind of structured as almost short little gags or short comic stories, in a way. But it's brilliantly cartooned. It has a really terrific black and white drawing style, so lots of great scenes in these caves and lots of terrific crowd scenes. There's a really bravura sequence, I think, when this character goes to a party. And the way that this party is depicted with little snatches of dialogue really conveyed the sense of a really chaotic, confusing kind of party atmosphere. And it was that really terrific scene in the book that really ushered in the final third of the book, which is the really difficult to track material. So I feel like I'm not doing it justice because it's a difficult book to describe. But I really enjoyed this book, The Heavy Hand, by Chris Silla. I just thought it was, what an exciting new cartoonist to have discovered through the pages of this book. So I loved it. I love this book. I'm really curious to hear what you thought of it.
Yeah, I actually did like it too. It actually reminded me quite a bit of Rory Hayes, the book that we read.
Yep,
because it has kind of like
some Rory Hayes in there.
Yeah, it has some. I mean, the cartooning is really nice in here. If you can get a little snatch of that in here.
And I would say cartoonists like Josh Simmons.
Yeah.
And the mix of humor and a more cartoony drawing style with the horror genre reminded me of Richard Sala. So those cartoonists could be some kind of touch points.
Yeah. Like you said, the psychedelic cover kind of like it's a very psychedelic story, I feel like.
Yeah.
And like Rory Hayes, there's the horror elements. There's like sex. There's like a guy masturbating in the very initial scene.
I thought he was urinating.
Oh, I
think he's supposed to be urinating.
Is he?
Yeah,
Okay.
The scene opens up with this faceless.
Okay, yeah.
Again, it looks like a doctor or scientist urinating. Dave had his own fantasy that he went into. He's urinating.
All right.
On machinery. That's the scene that opens up the book. So right away you kind of know
some weird stuff. You don't really understand what's going on.
Oh,
like
I didn't mention. Yeah, this book isn't that long, but I didn't mention the patchwork donkey and the fetus goat thing that hatches out of an egg. Are you guys getting the picture here? Like, this is like.
It's weird.
This is edgy alternative stuff, but it's absolutely terrifically cartooned. Look at that beautiful ink wash.
This is one of my favorite parts of the story, actually, when they're kind of like there's kind of some like
that's beautiful.
Yeah, there's kind of some history to these like creatures that are in the caves with these eyeballs, or kind of like a local legend of like how they formed. Featuring this masked man, and I thought that was like a really cool, like kind of origin that was kind of weird. And then the masked guy, like kind of shows up later, like riding donkeys and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
it has a real kind of sense. It is like David Lynch, in that a lot of the stuff you get is just kind of thrown in there because it's funny. It's a funny image, but yet it does have various layers of meaning and narrative going on. So it's not a very long book. You can read it in about an hour. Or less, but there's a lot kind of packed in there. It's very good. It's one of these little graphic novels that you come across from a small publisher that you just think like, people really need to see this. It's certainly not for everyone. It's not the kind of book that's going to have mass appeal, but if you are interested in the more art comics edge of comics, this was a terrific example of that kind of work. I'm really glad you liked it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what you would
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not like a tight story or anything, but there's enough story there to kind of like bring you through the whole book.
Yeah, there's enough of a narrative that you could follow that brought you to the end, and at the end of the day, how does the Heavy Hand cult connect to anything? We don't know, but it's more powerful and more mysterious and more exciting that we don't know. You know what I mean? Like when he mentions the main character, I guess spoiler alert, at the very end, mentions just offhand, you know, the last scene, I think they jump ahead in time a little bit, and he just offhand runs into an old friend of his from the town he was in at the beginning, and he mentions just offhand he's working for the Heavy Hand. What is that? And there's so much we don't know. We don't know what that means, but it's probably not good. So there's a lot left open. There's a lot of ambiguity. Great book.
Yeah, and great art. I think the art really, is top notch.
Yep, one of these artists who you're going to be excited to see new comics from. I think he's in the new Critters Are God.